Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Japan went to war against the United States because Japan wanted raw materials.
Japan is an island nation. It is a resource-poor nation. Even today, Japan depends on shipping. It depends on external resources for its oil, coal, and iron ore, etc. All of those things that make an industrial power run.
But close by in Southeast Asia, you had British Malaya with huge deposits of tin and production of rubber. You have the Dutch East Indies with tremendous oil production. These were materials Japan wanted. Now that Europe was at war, Britain could not properly protect British Malaya. The Dutch could not protect the Dutch East Indies. There was only one policeman in that whole area that could possibly stop Japan from robbing the Dutch East Indies and British Malaya. That was the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor.
By October 1941, the Japanese leadership decided that war was going to come. It was inevitable with the U.S. And therefore, if it was going to come, Japan would have to choose the timing of its coming.
Now, as far as why we got caught by surprise, I think probably the key factor was, yes, we knew Japan was going to war. There was no doubt about that. But we thought their attack would come in the Southeast Asia area because, after all, that's where the raw materials were.
Tactically, it was a great success. They caught the battleships there and destroyed a number of them. Operationally, it was a failure because the decisive instrument for the conduct of naval warfare was not the battleship. The aircraft carrier is the dominant instrument for the conduct of naval warfare. Strategically, it was a failure also because one of the assumptions that the Japanese had was that Americans were weak, that Americans lacked the moral fiber to fight the Japanese. That was very wrong. As a matter of fact, nothing did more to unite the United States than the attack at Pearl Harbor.
I ask that the Congress declare a state of war between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
In the wake of Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan. Germany, Japan's ally, consequently declared war on the U.S. Almost immediately, some American troops were flung into action.
We shipped out of Honolulu on the 1st of December of 1941. And when we got word that Pearl Harbor had been hit, the whole convoy was diverted to Brisbane, Australia. So we were the first U.S. troops on foreign soil as from the outbreak of the war. The battalion was sent to Java to fulfill the commitment that FDR had made to help the Dutch defend the Dutch East Indies. The Japanese were invading the 1st of March. Within 7 days, where the Dutch decided to capitulate, and on March 8th, why capitulation orders came down to surrender to the Japanese. That was when the war ended for us. We went up to Burma to work on a railroad to link Thailand to Burma. They used 61,000 Allied prisoners. I weighed probably at least 100 pounds when I left Batavia in September of 42, and in May of 43, I weighed 60 pounds. Being a prisoner of war is like being thrown into the biggest human lottery in the world. You don't know what's going to happen in the draw. And that's the way I looked at it. You just got lucky in the draw.
All persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated from the above area by 12 o'clock noon, Saturday, May 9th, 1942.
While some Americans were held prisoner by Japan, many Japanese Americans were held prisoner at home in the United States.
After Pearl Harbor, there was obviously a great shock in this country, and there was genuine fear on the West Coast that the Japanese might possibly invade. There was hysteria and panic, and when you combine that with the long history of anti-Japanese sentiment, you ignited this firestorm of hostility toward people of Japanese ancestry.
We could only take what we could carry, and most of us were carrying 2 suitcases or duffel bags.
They were tagged with a number, basically treated like luggage, put on a bus or a train and sent to what was called an assembly center. They were almost always at racetracks or old county fairgrounds. So many people remember finding that their new home was in fact a hastily converted horse stall. People were then transported to the more permanent War Relocation Authority centers. And there were 10 of those, and they were almost always in desolate and remote locations.
Nearly 100,000 Japanese Americans were confined during World War II in conditions that can at best be termed inadequate, and at worst, cruel and destructive. Ironically, Japanese Americans served with great distinction in the armed forces. One combat team became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history for its size and length of service. The unit received over 18,000 individual decorations for bravery, 9,500 Purple Hearts, 7 Presidential Unit citations, and 20 Congressional Medals of Honor.
But there were a lot of Japanese Americans who had deep wounds, deep psychological wounds that had been caused by the camps. The sense of shame, this fear being associated with the Japanese heritage, and there were a lot of people who thought the safest thing to do was to simply blend in, not have ties with anyone of Japanese ancestry, never speak the Japanese language, never try to teach your children anything about Japan. You have to understand many of them were adolescents or children, and so they could never quite cope with what had happened to them in terms of what it meant to be an American and what it meant to be of Japanese ancestry.